All right, so we are live, everyone. My name is Jesse, and I am the lead for the Conservation Stories Canada project, where over 2021, I'll be going to every province and up to the territories featuring conservation stories in action coast to coast. It's been a really exciting time doing a slew of digital interviews in the meantime, and today I am joined by Lisa Horn. She is a researcher and communicator for FLAP Canada, one of the leading advocacy organizations for bird conservation in the entire country. So Lisa, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jesse, for having me.
Awesome. So what are some of the, we're going to dive right in. What are some of the key threats facing birds? FLAP Canada covers a lot of topics of things that are impacting bird populations. I had an interview earlier today with Dr. Adam Smith talking about the loss of over 3 billion birds in Canada and North America over the last few decades. And what are some of the things that are affecting them and causing that big loss of biodiversity?
Yeah, unfortunately, birds are facing a lot of threats right now. So there's a lot of reasons leading to population declines. And I think that scientists have, most scientists agree that habitat loss is one of the major things, habitat degradation and things like that. But there's also ways that humans are directly, although unintentionally, killing a lot of birds. And one of those reasons is through our buildings. So birds are colliding with our windows and our built structures. And that's really what the organization that I work with, FLAP Canada, that's the issue that we focus on.
Yeah. And so I understand, as one of your backdrops before you ended up with a role at FLAP, you were integral in getting York University to help retrofit some of their buildings to prevent these bird collisions. Can you tell me a bit about that experience of doing that research and leading it into concrete action for conservation?
Yeah. So I did my master's at York University. I started in September 2018, and September is kind of the beginning of the peak of fall migration. And so it's a really good time to see lots of birds passing through urban areas, and it's exciting for birders to go out. But as I was walking around campus, as I got to York University, I started noticing all these birds that had hit windows on campus and that were either dead or injured. And I had known about this conservation issue before, but I didn't really realize the scale of it until I saw it with my own eyes. So what my boyfriend and I ended up doing, we started patrolling the York University campus during migration to try to rescue the birds that had hit windows, because we knew that birds that hit windows, sometimes they just look like they're stunned. You can't see any external injuries, but oftentimes they have internal injuries and they really need to get to medical attention. So we were rescuing birds and we were taking them to a wildlife rehabilitation facility to get the care that they needed so that they could continue their migration. And as we were going around, we were documenting exactly where we were finding birds on campus, so which buildings and also which facades of those buildings. And as we were collecting data, we soon realized that there were some areas that were really, really dangerous and some areas that were less dangerous. So there were hot spots on campus. And I went to my supervisor, who also really cares about bird conservation and this issue, and we decided to go to York University with kind of a proposal to have them treat their windows, because with all the data we collected, we could identify that if they treated just a couple really, really dangerous locations on campus, that they could really save a lot of birds. So they were sympathetic, they listened to us, but really nothing happened for quite a long time. So we started to gather support from other members of the university community, so other faculties, people in engineering and environmental studies, other people in biology. We had a whole bunch of people who were adding their voice to this call for York University to make their windows safer for birds. And eventually, the university actually did listen, and they installed bird-friendly window treatments on, I think to date, there are window treatments on 6 different really dangerous locations on campus. And as I understand, they've also approved a budget for the next couple of years to continue to treat some other locations as well. So they've really made a big investment and a commitment to helping birds on campus. And it's really wonderful. After the treatments were up, when I was going and monitoring, I wasn't finding dead or injured birds anymore. It was such a relief.
That is like the perfect closed loop story. Like, you start out with doing this fantastic research, it leads to some real good, but you've got to build up that advocacy. That is so, so cool. So are other universities doing this? Is it something where you need research teams on the ground at other universities to identify those hotspots to begin with? Is there a call to do this by various faculties, or are we at the stage where one's done it and we're seeing how it's going to work out and go from there?
Yeah, so there are other universities across Canada who are also lobbying to make their windows safer for birds. And in fact, Flap Canada created a program late last year or a little bit earlier than that called the Bird Safe Campus Initiative. So it was kind of a way to provide kind of tools and guides and best practices for people who are trying to advocate for bird-friendly buildings on a campus environment, because university and college campuses are kind of uniquely positioned actually to be leaders of change in this field, because there's lots of really passionate both undergraduate students, graduate students, faculty, and things like that who want to see their university adopt more sustainable building practices and just do better in an environmental aspect. Yeah. So when we were creating this program, we kind of got the input from all those other universities across Canada who are also dealing with this issue to kind of get a comprehensive, idea of what can people do if they want to advocate for birds on campus, and also kind of best practices. So like how to start a monitoring program, because there's actually a lot of considerations. If you're actually handling and collecting dead birds, you actually need permits. You need to know how to safely rescue birds and to get them the help they need. And, there's lots of things that you need to consider. So we try to provide people with guides to be able to, not have to make too many mistakes and just kind of have everything go smoothly. And also the lessons that we learned and other universities have learned, trying to advocate to their university as well to adopt bird-friendly practices.
Fantastic. Well, I will link in that resource for people who are watching this broadcast to learn more and get involved. That's fantastic. So with making windows better, what does that actually look like? So for me, I've been on the subway before where you pass these things and there's like a picture of a hawk. It's like a fake cutout of a hawk and it's on the window. Is that actually doing any good? Like, what does it actually look like to make windows bird safe?
Okay, yes, that's a very good point, Jesse. Yes, those hawk silhouettes absolutely do not work. And a lot of areas on campus had, you can tell that there's a bird collision problem when people put up those hawk silhouettes. But yes, unfortunately, they don't do anything. So the problem with those silhouettes is oftentimes they're just one or two of them on a window. So it's leaving most of the glass really untreated. So to prevent birds from hitting windows, we need to provide them with visual cues over the entire surface of the glass to show them that it's a barrier that they can't fly through. So those markers, whatever visual markers we put on the glass, they need to be no more than 5 centimeters by 5 centimeters apart. And that's so smaller birds like chickadees or hummingbirds that, they might try to fly through any bigger gap, that they are going to realize that that's a barrier. So they need to be very close together over the entire surface of the glass. And also what's important is that they're on the outside of the glass, because that's another common mistake that people make is they put something on the inside of the glass, but then when there's reflections on the outside, the markers are invisible and birds still hit windows.
Fascinating. So there's no sense in which they're seeing that hawk silhouette and going, that's a hawk. That's just absolutely, completely wrong entirely.
Nope, they're just seeing it as a barrier. So they're not going to fly into that hawk, but they'll fly right beside it and hit the glass there.
You can make lines or dots fairly unobtrusive from a person's perspective where people can still see very easily through the window, but the birds would see it as that barrier. That's correct?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the ones at York University, so what we put there was, it's called feather friendly. So they're just white, they're dots, white dots on the outside of the window and spaced 5 centimeters by 5 centimeters apart. And actually when you're inside the building looking out, you hardly see them. And even like there have been people working in the buildings and I've talked to them and said, oh, they've been up for like several weeks and they only noticed them like then. So they really don't obscure your view. They only cover such a small percentage of the glass.
Yeah. How cool is that? Well, way to go and congratulations. And that's such a heartening story to hear about. So bird collision with windows is a huge issue. Two others that sort of I've certainly heard about, and I think a lot of people have heard about, are wind turbines and cats. We'll start with wind turbines. Now, on the scheme of things, apparently, like there's a lot of land that's taken up by windows. Every building, every house has these windows. We've probably all had this experience of having a bird hit our window and die, and that really adds up on a huge scale. For wind turbines, they can certainly hit birds on the wing. Is this a huge issue? Is this really affecting bird populations? Can you speak to this at all or not?
Yeah, so in the grand scheme of things, wind turbines are an issue, but they rank lower than some of those other major things like windows and cats.
Yeah.
And I think what scientists have actually found, it's actually bats that are being more threatened by wind turbines than birds. So birds do die from hitting wind turbines, and I think that there are, there's best practices to try to avoid putting wind turbines in major migration routes along major migration corridors to try to prevent that from happening. But I think that it's bats that are really being threatened by that in particular.
Okay, I'm really glad to hear that. And I mean, again, when it comes to engineering that sort of scale, there's a lot of benefits to things that are wind turbines and other programs, but you want to make sure you're doing it as best as possible to avoid that potential, extra impact on wildlife. So cats, I mean, I know FLAP's main claim to fame is highlighting light awareness. It's highlighting, ways to prevent birds from hitting windows. What is the scale of the cat problem, and is there something that people can do to help mitigate that?
Yeah, so cats are ranked at the very top of a way that humans are directly killing birds, so through our actions. So cats are really a major concern, and they kill billions of birds every year. So it's not just feral cats, it's people's owned cats who are outdoor cats, and that's they don't always bring all of their victims home. They're just really efficient killing machines. So one thing that people can do to help keep birds and other wildlife safe, because it's not just birds that are affected by cats, it's small mammals, amphibians, reptiles, and things like that, is they can keep their cats indoors. And there's really lots of ways to enrich a cat's life, even if they're an indoor cat. So people can teach their cat to be able to walk on a leash. People can make catios, so like little outdoor enclosures that the cat can enjoy the outdoors while being kept safe and keeping wildlife safe as well. And it's also really much better for your cat in terms of health to be kept indoors, because outdoor cats are much more likely to get diseases, get attacked by other cats, other animals, hit by cars. So it's safer both for cats and for wildlife as well, for cats to be kept indoors.
Yeah. And if you create a catio, it's the ultimate conversation starter with friends and family. You can just be like, I have my catio, and people will look at you askance, and you can go from there. So I'm really glad we got a chance to bring that up. One last thing on bird conservation. So we talked about the fact that we want to avoid birds hitting windows with sort of decals or things on the outside of the window. But another big element to this is making sure that they're not lit up at certain times of day, or that they're lit up in a different sort of way. Can you speak to that with regards to FLAP's work on making sure that buildings do that in a sustainable way?
Yeah, so light pollution also really affects migrating birds, and it kind of plays into this window collision issue as well. So a lot of songbirds, they migrate at night because, conditions for flight are usually better at night. It's calmer, they're less likely to be caught by predators. It's cooler, so because migration generates a lot of body heat, so they can cool off more efficiently. So a lot of these migratory songbirds, they migrate at night, and they also use at least in part, the stars to navigate. But the problem is, as they go along their migration routes, they're passing over cities, and the sky glow created by light pollution, it can throw birds off course, and it can draw them into cities. So once they're drawn into cities, then they're more likely to hit windows because they're being brought into close proximity to buildings. And another problem is with these point sources of light. So if you think of things like event lighting, those beams that just shoot up into the sky at like sports events or concerts or things like that, birds are also attracted to that. They're inadvertently drawn into it, and they have a really hard time leaving that. So they're drawn in, they fly around until they're completely exhausted as well. So light pollution that's just one aspect of the threat of light pollution to birds. So it influences the likelihood of window collisions, but there's lots of other impacts of light pollution as well.
Yeah, there was a fascinating, policy action that I heard about recently, which is the World Trade Center new sites with the light beams going into the sky. It's like aeroecology. The birds on their migration routes would get sort of sucked into this vortex. They wanted to stick around the light. So they turn off the light for just a few minutes, and that would allow the birds to escape that, head on their way. So it's not something where you need to prevent these things from happening totally. It's just where you need to be mindful of how they're used on a broad scale. Is that correct? Or
Yes, it's better to try to avoid things like that, but I do know that they've been able to kind of mitigate the threat by monitoring. So I think that they do have volunteers, watching those beams, and when a certain amount of birds get stuck, then they ask them to turn it off for, like you said, for a couple minutes to let them out. But there's also a lot of, energy waste with light pollution in cities. So, people, buildings and stuff, keeping their lights on all night when there's nobody working there. So it's wasting electricity as well. It's unneeded light. So, it benefits people as well by reducing that, because there's a cost savings.
Yeah.
You're using less electricity, and it also helps.
All the benefits of turning off lights. Keep your cat indoors, keep it on the catio, and turn off the lights. Just leave your cat in the dark in that little area you've left it. Eating so many birds all at once is fantastic. Lisa, this has been so much fun. Again, I'm so thrilled that you got the role at FLAP. It's so exciting. I think that Canada's birds are in a really good hands now that you're on the case. And thank you so much for sharing so many ways that birds are under threats, but that people can really take action to help save them. I really appreciate it today.
Okay, thanks for having me.